May 1, 1945, 3:50 a.m. The rubble-choked streets of Berlin. A single German staff car crawls through the smoke, white flag snapping in the pre-dawn wind. Inside sits General Hans Krebs, bearing news that will echo through history. Adolf Hitler is dead. But when he delivers this message to Soviet commanders in a candlelit room still warm with the breath of battle, the response isn't relief, it's refusal. No negotiation, no pause, only unconditional surrender. Krebs can't give it, he doesn't have the authority. And so begins the strangest final act of the war. A nation dying in installments, surrendering not once, but 4 separate times. Each ceremony a desperate attempt to end what had already ended, each signature a testament to how thoroughly the Reich had shattered. This is the story of Germany's fragmented collapse, how a regime built on absolute power died in pieces, unable even to surrender with unity, forced to sign its defeat again and again, until the world finally believed it was over. The silence is unnatural. For weeks, Soviet artillery has pounded Berlin into dust, a mechanical heartbeat of destruction that never sleeps. But now, at 3:50 in the morning on May 1st, the guns have stopped. The sudden absence of sound is almost painful, ears ringing in the void, waiting for the next shell that doesn't come. From the smoking ruins near the Reich Chancellery, a German staff car emerges. It moves slowly, cautiously, flying a white flag that glows ghostly in the darkness. Soviet sentries tense, fingers on triggers as the vehicle approaches their lines. This isn't surrender, not yet. This is something stranger. Inside the car sits General Hans Krebs, chief of the German General Staff. His uniform is immaculate despite the chaos, but his eyes tell a different story, the hollowed-out look of a man who has watched an empire incinerate from the inside. He carries with him a piece of paper and a message that will race through the Soviet command structure like electricity through wire. The meeting takes place in a half-destroyed building, lit by candles, and the occasional flare burst outside. Across the table sits General Vasily Chuikov, commander of the Soviet 8th Guards Army, the man whose troops are literally standing on Hitler's doorstep. Krebs speaks in fluent Russian, a skill that makes this surreal conversation possible without interpreters. "I have important news," Krebs begins, his voice steady despite everything. "The Führer, Adolf Hitler, committed suicide yesterday." The room goes still. You can almost hear the candle flames dancing in the silence. This is the moment the world has waited 6 years to hear, the death of the man who plunged Europe into its darkest nightmare. Chuikov's expression doesn't change. He's a professional soldier, and he's learned to trust nothing that comes from German lips. The news travels up the chain with astonishing speed. Chuikov contacts Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the architect of Berlin's encirclement. Zhukov immediately phones Stalin himself, waking the Soviet dictator in the early morning hours. There's a pause. You can imagine Stalin processing this information, calculating, always calculating. His response comes back down the chain, cold and absolute. No negotiations, no truces, no discussion of terms, only unconditional surrender of all German armed forces. Krebs shifts in his chair. He's come to negotiate a separate peace, to buy time, to salvage something from the wreckage. But he has no authority to surrender. Joseph Goebbels, now nominally the chancellor of what remains of Germany, has sent Krebs to talk, to stall, to explore options. Anything but the one thing the Soviets will accept. The meeting drags on for hours, circular and frustrating. Krebs speaks of forming a new government. Chuikov repeats, unconditional surrender, back and forth, while outside the city burns and German soldiers die defending streets that no longer matter. As dawn breaks over Berlin, Krebs returns to the bunker empty-handed. The ceasefire ends. Soviet artillery resumes its methodical destruction, each shell a punctuation mark in a sentence that has only one possible ending. Inside the Führer bunker, the leadership of the Third Reich faces a simple, terrible truth. They cannot even surrender properly. The machinery of capitulation requires authority, and authority requires a government. But their government has become a suicide cult, operating from a hole in the ground beneath a burning city. The Führer bunker has become a tomb for the living. 30 feet below Berlin's shattered streets, in a concrete warren that smells of diesel fuel, sweat, and slow death, the last remnants of Nazi leadership huddle in fluorescent-lit corridors. The walls shake with each Soviet shell impact. Dust sifts down from the ceiling. The ventilation system wheezes, pushing stale air through rooms that have become both command center and crypt. Joseph Goebbels sits at a desk writing, always writing. The man who built Hitler's myth with words now faces the impossible task of writing an ending. He's technically the chancellor now, second in the line of succession after Hitler's suicide. But chancellor of what? A government that controls less territory than a large farm, an army that exists in fragments, cut off from central command, fighting not for victory but from sheer inability to imagine stopping. His wife Magda moves through the bunker like a ghost. Their 6 children play in the corridors, eerily cheerful, unaware that their parents have already decided their fate. You can hear their laughter sometimes, a sound so wrong in this place that it makes hardened officers look away. Goebbels receives Krebs's report of the failed negotiation with cold fury. Unconditional surrender. Never. The propaganda minister who spent 12 years telling Germans they were destined to rule Europe cannot conceive of simply stopping. In his mind, this isn't defeat. It's Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, a final act of defiant immolation. On May 1st, as Soviet troops close to within blocks of the Reich Chancellery, Goebbels makes his decision. There will be no surrender from him, no capture, no trial. He and Magda will follow Hitler into death, and they'll take their children with them. The details are almost too horrific to comprehend. Magda personally administers morphine to her children, Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Hold, Hedda, and Hyde, ages 4 to 12, then feeds them cyanide capsules as they drift into unconsciousness. One by one, the 6 children die in their beds, dressed in their nightclothes, their faces peaceful. Goebbels and Magda then walk up the bunker stairs to the garden above, the same garden where Hitler's body was burned just hours earlier. An SS orderly shoots them both. Their bodies are doused in petrol and set alight, but the fire doesn't catch properly. Soviet troops will find them partly burned, sprawled in the rubble, just 2 more corpses in a city that has become one vast grave. With Goebbels dead, the command structure collapses entirely. Martin Bormann, Hitler's secretary, attempts to flee the city and vanishes into the chaos. His body won't be found for decades. Other officials scatter, burn documents, change into civilian clothes, or simply put guns to their own heads. The bunker, that concrete nucleus of Nazi power, empties out. The lighting fails. The generators sputter and die. In the darkness, wounded soldiers and terrified civilians huddle in the lower levels, waiting for Soviet troops to break through the final doors. Command of Berlin's defense, such as it still exists, falls by default to General Helmut Weidling. He's a career soldier, a professional artilleryman who fought his way up the ranks through skill rather than party loyalty. He didn't ask for this poisoned chalice. The Battle of Berlin was already hopeless when he took command days earlier. Now it's simply a matter of how many more will die before the inevitable conclusion. Weidling surveys what's left, scattered pockets of troops, some still fighting with ferocious determination, others already surrendering in groups. Ammunition running out, no food, no water, no hope. The city is a moonscape of rubble where streets have ceased to exist as recognizable features. He makes the calculation that Krebs couldn't and Goebbels refused to make. Continuing to fight serves no purpose except adding to the body count. On the morning of May 2, 1945, Weidling decides to do what the leadership of the Third Reich has proven incapable of: end it. May 2, 1945, 6:00 a.m. General Helmut Weidling walks across the rubble towards Soviet lines, accompanied by his staff officers. He's not waving a white flag. There's no ceremony here, no formality. Just an exhausted man crossing a broken street to end a battle that should never have been fought. Soviet soldiers watch him approach, weapons raised, suspicious. They've learned that Germans in Berlin fight with a desperation that borders on madness. Civilians throw Molotov cocktails from windows. Hitler Youth with Panzerfausts ambush tanks from basements. Nothing is what it seems in this nightmare city, But Weidling's group makes no hostile moves. They simply walk forward, hands visible, until a Soviet officer steps out to meet them. "I am the commander of the Berlin defense area," Weidling says through an interpreter. "I wish to surrender the city." The words hang in the smoke-filled air. After everything, after 6 years of war, after millions of deaths, after cities across Europe reduced to ash, it comes down to this. One tired general speaking 9 words to another. The Soviets take him to their command post. There's no dramatic ceremony, no grand signing at a mahogany table. Weidling sits in a damaged building and writes out an order to all remaining German troops in Berlin. His handwriting is clear and precise, the practiced script of a staff officer who has written thousands of orders. But this one is different. On 30 April, the Führer committed suicide and thus abandoned those who had sworn loyalty to him. "I order the immediate cessation of resistance." It's broadcast from Soviet loudspeakers mounted on trucks that crawl through the ruins. The message echoes off shattered buildings, carried into basements and bunkers where German soldiers still hold out. Some weep with relief. Others smash their weapons in rage. A few keep fighting anyway, either unable to believe it or unwilling to accept it. But slowly, incrementally, the Battle of Berlin ends. White flags appear in windows. Soldiers emerge from rubble with their hands raised, hollow-eyed, filthy, staggering. They're boys and old men mostly. The Wehrmacht's frontline units were ground to pieces weeks ago in the approach to the city. What defended Berlin in its final days was a collection of fragments. SS fanatics, Hitler Youth, Volkssturm militia, office clerks given rifles they barely knew how to use. Soviet troops pour into the city center. They raise the red flag over the Reichstag in a moment that will be captured in one of history's most iconic photographs. But the image doesn't show the bodies piled in the streets, the smoke that makes it hard to breathe, the thousands of Soviet soldiers who died taking this symbolic target. By nightfall on May 2nd, Berlin is in Soviet hands. The city that once symbolized Nazi power, with its massive rallies, its torchlit parades, its architecture of intimidation, is now a graveyard. Perhaps 100,000 civilians are dead. The exact number will never be known. Bodies lie under rubble that won't be cleared for years. This is surrender number 1. The capital city, the symbolic heart of the Reich, formally capitulated. But Berlin is not Germany. Even as Weidling signs his surrender, German forces are still fighting across a front that stretches from Denmark to Austria. In the west, they face British, American, and French armies. In the east, Soviet forces continue their relentless advance. The Wehrmacht remains, in theory, a functioning military organization with millions of men under arms. Without a central government to order a general surrender, the war continues, not because Germany can win, but because no one with authority has told it to stop. In Western Europe, the situation is different but equally fragmented. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery commands British and Canadian forces that have pushed deep into northern Germany. German armies facing him are less fanatical, more willing to accept that the war is lost. They're also terrified of Soviet capture. Surrender to the British seems infinitely preferable to surrender to the Red Army. On May 4, 1945, at Montgomery's headquarters on Lumberg Heath, German officers sign a separate surrender of all German forces in the Netherlands, northwest Germany, and Denmark. This is surrender number 2, a regional capitulation that ends fighting on Montgomery's front, but leaves the rest of the war still burning. May 7, 1945, 2:41 a.m. Reims, France. In a red brick schoolhouse serving as Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the war in Europe ends for the 3rd time. The building is modest, almost absurdly so for the setting of such a momentous occasion. It's a vocational school requisitioned by the Allies, its rooms converted into offices and operations centers. Outside, the French city sleeps, unaware that in a second-floor classroom, history is being written. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, is not in the room. He's waiting in his office upstairs, a deliberate choice. He refuses to meet with the German delegation until they've signed. No handshakes, no photos, no legitimacy granted to representatives of a regime he spent years destroying. The German delegation is led by Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedberg and General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff of the Wehrmacht. They arrived yesterday, sent by Hitler's designated successor, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, who now leads what remains of German government from a port city in the north. Dönitz is trying to manage an impossible situation: surrender to the Western Allies while keeping forces in the east fighting against the Soviets, buying time for German soldiers and civilians to flee westward, away from Soviet vengeance. The Allies won't allow it. They insist on simultaneous surrender on all fronts. The fiction of separate wars, Germany versus the West, Germany versus the Soviets, must end completely. Jodl has spent the day arguing, negotiating, pleading for delays. Give us 48 hours, he says. Let our eastern armies pull back. Let civilians evacuate. Each request is denied. The Allied position is absolute. Immediate, unconditional surrender on all fronts, or the bombing continues, the killing continues, until there's nothing left to surrender. Finally, at 2:41 in the morning, Jodl sits at a plain wooden table. The document before him is titled Act of Military Surrender. It's brief, surprisingly so, just 5 short paragraphs that formally end the Third Reich's ability to make war. Around the table sit representatives of all the major Allied powers: American, British, French, and Soviet. The room is thick with cigarette smoke and tension. You can hear the scratch of pen on paper, the shuffle of documents, the occasional cough breaking the silence. There's no grand speech, no theatrical moment. Jodl signs. Friedberg signs. The Allied representatives sign as witnesses. Eisenhower is summoned. He enters the room, stone-faced, and asks Jodl a single question through an interpreter. Do you understand the terms of the surrender you have just signed? Jodl nods, yeah. You will be held accountable for any violation of these terms. Another nod. The meeting is over. Eisenhower leaves without another word. Later, for the press, he will pose with the 2 pens used in the signing, holding them up in a V for victory gesture. But in the moment, there's no celebration, just a grim satisfaction that it's finally done. The surrender is to take effect at 11:01 p.m. on May 8, 1945, a grace period to allow the news to reach all German units, and for the complicated mechanics of ceasefire to propagate across a 1,000-mile front. This is surrender number 3, the complete capitulation of all German armed forces to the Western Allies and nominally to the Soviets. But there's a problem. The Soviets are furious. The ceremony in Reims included a Soviet representative, General Ivan Susloparov, but he was a relatively junior officer. Moscow views the Reims surrender as an attempt by the Western Allies to take sole credit for Germany's defeat, to write the Soviets out of the narrative, despite the fact that Soviet forces bore the brunt of the fighting, suffered the most casualties, and conquered Berlin itself. Stalin sees this as a political maneuver, and he won't tolerate it. The Soviet Union demands a proper surrender ceremony, conducted on German soil, with senior German officers surrendering formally to Soviet command. The Western Allies, eager to maintain the alliance even as it begins to fray, agree. The Reims document, they decide, was merely a preliminary protocol. The real surrender, the one that will be recognized by all parties, the one that will stand in history books, must happen again. In Berlin, before the Red Army, with the world watching, one more time Germany will surrender, and this time it will be final. May 8, 1945, just before midnight, Berlin. In a damaged military engineering school in the Soviet-occupied Karlshorst district, the war ends for the 4th and final time. The building has been hastily prepared for the occasion. Soviet soldiers have cleared rubble, set up tables, arranged chairs. Klieg lights have been installed. This ceremony will be filmed, photographed, documented for posterity. The room is packed with Allied officers, American, British, French, and dozens of Soviets. Newsreel cameras are rolling. This is theater, but it's necessary theater, the official, unambiguous end of Nazi Germany. At 11:00 p.m., the German delegation enters. They're led by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the High Command of the Wehrmacht, the highest-ranking military officer still at his post. He's in full dress uniform, complete with Field Marshal's baton, as if the ceremony deserves the formality of his rank despite the humiliation it represents. Alongside him are Admiral von Friedberg, who signed at Reims, and Colonel General Hans-Eugen Stumpf, representing the Luftwaffe. Keitel's face is carved from stone. He walks with military precision, spine straight, shoulders back, a man determined to surrender with dignity, even though dignity is precisely what this ceremony is designed to strip away. He's not here to negotiate. He's here to accept terms, to sign a document, to perform submission. The Allies are represented by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the Soviet military commander who orchestrated the conquest of Berlin, and Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder, Eisenhower's deputy. Eisenhower himself has chosen not to attend. Like at Reims, he refuses to share a room with representatives of Nazi Germany. The German officers are directed to their seats. They sit, stiff and uncomfortable under the harsh lights. In front of them lies the surrender document, the German instrument of surrender, identical to what was signed in Reims but now being solemnized here, in the ruins of the city they failed to defend. Zhukov stands. His voice is hard, clipped, carrying the weight of 20 million Soviet dead. I ask the German delegation if they have read the instrument of unconditional surrender and are prepared to sign it. Keitel responds in German, yes. Then proceed with the signing. Keitel leans forward. His hand, the same hand that signed orders for invasions, for occupations, for all the apparatus of German military conquest, now signs away everything. 3 times he signs, once on each copy of the document. Von Friedberg signs. Stumpf signs. The scratch of pen on paper is the only sound. Then the Allied representatives sign as witnesses. The whole procedure takes less than 30 minutes. No speeches, no dramatic pronouncements, just the bureaucratic formality of ending a war that killed perhaps 60 million people. Keitel stands, salutes stiffly, and walks out. The newsreel footage will capture him descending the stairs, his face a mask, his movements mechanical. He will later say that signing the surrender was the worst moment of his life, worse than the defeats, worse than the knowledge of coming war crimes trials, worse than everything. In that moment, he embodies the complete destruction of the Wehrmacht, the military machine that once seemed unstoppable. It's now past midnight. May 8th has become May 9th. In Moscow, Stalin will announce victory on May 9th, the date Russians still celebrate as Victory Day. In Western Europe, the celebration will be May 8th, VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. But in Berlin, in that engineering school in Karlshorst, the date doesn't matter. What matters is that it's over. The shooting has stopped. The killing has stopped. The war that began with Germany's invasion of Poland in September 1939, that consumed Europe in flames, that murdered millions in industrial death camps, that left cities as rubble and families as memories, is finished. This is surrender number 4, the final one, the one that counts. Germany has capitulated 4 separate times because the Reich died as it lived, chaotic, fragmented, incapable of unity even in defeat. From Weidling in Berlin to Montgomery's regional surrender, from Jodl in Reims to Keitel in Karlshorst, each ceremony marked another piece of the regime falling away, another admission that the Thousand Year Reich lasted exactly 12 years. The war in Europe is over. Outside the Karlshorst building, Berlin smolders in the spring darkness. The city is a moonscape of destruction, entire districts erased, landmarks reduced to skeletal ruins, streets buried under rubble. In the West, Allied troops are discovering the full horror of the concentration camps. In the East, Soviet forces occupy territories that will become the Iron Curtain. The post-war world is already taking shape, built on the ashes of what came before. For Germany, there is no ambiguity left, no room for negotiation, no escape clause in history. The Nazi regime surrendered 4 times because it took 4 ceremonies to make the world believe, and to make Germany itself accept that this time it was truly over. If you found this story powerful, WWII Ember brings you more untold stories from history's darkest conflict. Subscribe to journey deeper into the moments that defined a generation. Hit the like button if this narrative moved you, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which of these 4 surrenders did you find most significant? Your engagement helps us tell these stories to more people who need to remember.